For a minute, George, because I want to bring in Pate. He's a criminal defense attorney. Paige, what do you make of this debate that's going on in the courtroom right now over this animation, which is really, as described by Mark O'Mara, less an animation, more some still photos, if you will, to show what the defense insists was that Trayvon Martin was effectively beating up George Zimmerman. He was resisting. He feared for his life. He took out his gun, and then he shot and killed him.
You know, this type of evidence can be incredibly powerful for a jury. Up to this point, the jury's heard testimony, they've seen pictures, but they haven't really been able to put themselves at the scene of the incident. This type of testimony, this type of an expert, allows the jury to step inside the shoes of George Zimmerman. So it can be incredibly powerful for the defense to let the jury feel like they're George Zimmerman, feel like they're under threat at that point, and hopefully for the defense's side, it will make it seem more legitimate, his claim of self-defense.
And so what is the basic legal argument? And I want to briefly listen in, but Paige, briefly, what is the basic legal argument that the defense is making? Why should they allow this animation to go forward, which, after all, is their side of the story, the defense's side of the story, a pro-George Zimmerman version of what happened?
Well, like any type of expert testimony, it's based on science and it's based on studies. We have this particular individual who created the animation or who created the stills testifying about the different points that he measured to make sure that it was all accurate and consistent with the evidence that's in the record so far. And that's the challenge for the judge. She has to determine that this evidence will, number one, be helpful for the jury, and number two, be consistent with the evidence that we know is already in the record. She's not going to let them create some story or put on some show. It has to be based on fact, and it has to be based in science.
And the jurors are not in the courtroom right now. This is a discussion that's going on in front of the judge. The judge will make this decision. They're not going to see this animation. I don't know if they're going to show it to the judge right now. It looks like they're getting ready for something along those lines. But the reason the jurors are not in there, go ahead and explain, Paige.
Well, at this point, the judge has not ruled that it's admissible. So you don't want the jury to see it until the court has first looked at it and determined that it has a proper foundation, it's not unduly prejudicial, and then once the judge makes that threshold ruling, then they'll bring the jury back in and they'll play the animation or show the stills.
All right, I think they're getting ready to show those stills or those animations. If they are, I'd be interested in seeing them. They're looking up at that screen over there, so maybe we'll show that to our viewers if we can. Now, let's step in for a moment, see what they're talking about. This is an important piece of potential evidence that may or may not be. Is this surprising to you, Paige? You've been in a lot of these kinds of trials that you got technology. They've been getting ready for this for a year. They haven't figured it out yet. They had a lot of technical glitches last week.
Well, it's not surprising. I don't think I've ever participated in a trial that lasted more than a couple of days where we didn't have at least some technical issues. You know, these days we're using technology a lot more in the courtroom than we used to. It's no longer showing a document to a witness or using even a document camera. We now have in almost every courtroom around America very sophisticated audio-visual type equipment so that an animation like this can be projected to the jury and the judge and where everyone else can see it. So with that kind of technology, you're going to run into problems from time to time.
All right, let me bring in another decision the judge, Deborah Nelson, made last night. An important decision late in the day after the jurors were dismissed. The judge decided that she will allow results of Trayvon Martin's toxicology report to be admitted, which the defense claims is evidence that the teenager may have been impaired the night of the shooting. In an interview last night with CNN's Piers Morgan, Zimmerman attorney Mark O'Mara had this reaction. Watch this.
The judge had initially said that we could not present that evidence until we were able to tie it up by terms of being relevant. And we knew that we would have a toxicologist come in or a medical examiner come in to say that any level of pot in the system could have some effect. And of course, that falls in line with what George Zimmerman stated in his first couple of moments with the non-emergency operator when he said that it looked like he's on drugs or something. So we sort of presume the judge is going to let this in.
All right, so let's discuss this for a second while we wait for them to fix their computer problems over there. Paige, this toxicology report, the defense wanted it admitted. It says that there was elements of marijuana use shown in the autopsy in the report there. But could it though backfire on the defense?
I guess that's possible. I think still on balance, the defense wants this type of evidence in. perhaps not so much to show how Trayvon Martin was acting that evening, but perhaps for the bad character implications that the prosecution mentioned. You know, a ruling like this is tough for a judge. She has to weigh the effect that it's going to have on the jury, that prejudicial effect. You know, is it really relevant to what happened that evening, whether or not Trayvon Martin had smoked marijuana at some time in the past? But nonetheless, it's going to come in. I think it was the right ruling under the law. And the question is, how much will the defense be able to use it? Will their expert actually be able to say that this amount of THC led to some type of behavior that justified the shooting? That's a totally different question.
All right, Paige, hold on for a moment. George Howell, hold on as well. Once again, they're discussing right now whether an animation should be admissible in this court to resume. We'll continue to let's bring in Sonny Hostin, our legal analyst, former federal prosecutor, also Paige Pate, criminal defense attorney, as we evidence. What's your take, Paige, on this debate over this computerized animation? Sonny, you just heard her say she's surprised the judge is even considering it seriously.
Well, Sonny is right that this type of evidence doesn't always come into a trial. In fact, it's fairly unusual that it comes into a criminal trial. It's more common in civil trials. You know, a lot of people are probably wondering, why is the judge just now considering this? Why didn't this come up earlier? The real reason is that the judge has to wait to hear the evidence that's presented. You know, if they tried to address this before the trial ever started, she would not know the context. She would not know what evidence would be in the record to support the testimony of the defense witness in this case. So it takes some time. It's an important issue, and she cannot make that ruling until she's heard the other evidence that was presented at trial.
The jurors standing there. So let's bring in Paige Pate, criminal defense attorney, as we await. You know, we're going to see that hoodie, that famous hoodie, that sweatshirt that Trayvon Martin was wearing, the hood around his head. What does that suggest to you as a criminal defense attorney, Paige?
Well, it's a critical piece of evidence, Wolf. We've always known that from the beginning of the trial. At this point, though, the defense doesn't just get to ask prosecution witnesses questions. They get to present their own theory through their own expert as to how the injuries may have occurred, how the death may have occurred, and obviously the point is to help establish the self-defense claim.
That the George Zimmerman acted in self-defense, and that's why he shot and killed Trayvon Martin. But once again, explain what Trayvon Martin was wearing, specifically that sweatshirt with the hood over his head, why that would be so important. Why do they have to go through all of that?
Well, at this point, we can only speculate until we actually hear the witness testify, but I assume this witness is going to talk about the markings on the sweatshirt and other articles of clothing that Trayvon Martin was wearing to show the trajectory, perhaps, of the bullet, to show the distance that Mr. Zimmerman's arm was at the time he pulled the trigger. All of those are critical issues in this case.
All right, the judge is now talking to the 6 jurors. Let's